Right. Well, hope you're all doing well. So welcome everybody. My name is Valerie Sloan and I work at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. My background is in Arctic and Alpine glacial history and climate history. And now I work in education and higher education. And I'm happy to have you here today. So we have having a workshop on preparing an NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program application. And I would like our speakers to introduce themselves. So I'll start with you, Blake.
Hi, everyone. My name is Blake. I'm a third-year biological oceanography PhD student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I did an REU program with Ahmi actually a few years ago. So really happy to be here with you all and to share with you about the NSF GRFP. Nice to meet you.
Ahmi?
Hi, and I'm Ahmi. I'm also a third-year PhD student at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I was a 2023 NSF GRFP Fellow. And like Blake said, we did a research program together, and we've conducted this webinar a couple of times, and happy to answer any questions and share about the GRFP with you guys.
Right, thank you. All right, well, I think I'll just let you take it away. So go for it. And anybody, please feel free to put questions in the Slido or in the chat. We'll post the Slido link again. And so, yeah, take it away, Blake.
Right. So first, we're going to just kind of cover what the NSF GRFP is. It's the National Science Foundation's Graduate Research Fellowship Program. And basically what this fellowship is it's your golden ticket to get into graduate school. And if anyone's had talks about how to get to graduate school thus far, hopefully they've kind of covered that getting into graduate school is all about money. You get a stipend as a graduate student, and in order for a lab to take you on, they need to pay you your stipend. So what the GRFP does is it basically pays you that stipend. And so if you get this fellowship, a lot of labs, if you tell them you have the funding, they'll let you right in because you're able to pay yourself the stipend and they don't have to pay you from a grant per se. So the other thing that it does is it covers $12,000 in tuition. So that'll cover your course fees and everything to enroll in the university. And lastly, you can get access to the NSF intern program through the GRFP. And so you'll have like a program coordinator and they can help you with the application process for NSF intern. So altogether, it's a really great package deal and it's an awesome fellowship to apply for if you're thinking about going to graduate school.
So in the chat, I sent the link to the NSF website where you can find the program solicitation. It's 18 pages. The first thing you're going to want to do is read all of it carefully. Here you'll find things like important deadlines, your eligibility. For example, if you're an undergrad, you can apply as many times. However, if you're admitted to grad school, you can only apply once. There's also important details like application instructions and review criteria. So what you're going to want to include in your application, as well as other information such as like the topics that are covered. And here you can see this is from last year's GRFP solicitation or a couple of years ago. They're different deadlines, so they're staggered. So all of these details are found in the program solicitation.
Alrighty, so we're just kind of going to go through the different components of the application. The application itself requires a personal statement that's 3 pages, and it requires a research statement that is 2 pages. The GRFP is very, very focused on, well, I guess actually the National Science Foundation in general. When you apply, they're very focused on 2 sections of your applications that you need to complete. The first is intellectual merit, and the second is broader impacts. And we'll go over what each of those mean. But they want you to be very, very explicit about how you're answering and addressing those 2 sections of the application. And the other thing that they require is 3 letters of recommendation. So that's kind of a lot, but you want to make sure you're asking people that really know you and can speak to your character and can also address the intellectual merit and broader impacts that you bring to the table. So without further ado, let's go into what those two things mean.
So intellectual merit is the potential to advance knowledge. This can do anything and cover topics such as like your previous research experience or how your research is valuable to society and how it contributes to the greater field of what you're studying. And that's going to look differently based on your personal statement and your research statement. Next is broader impacts, which is the potential to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. And this can also look differently based on the two statements. So broader impacts are how you conduct yourself outside of an academic setting, such as your inclusion or your involvement in any outside organizations or any outreach that you participated in or volunteer work that you've done. And this is also going to look differently for both two statements, which we'll get into.
Alrighty, so first let's kind of dive into the personal statement and what kinds of things you can include in that personal statement. So we just kind of threw this in because there is kind of a formula for how you apply to the GRFP, and there is a website that you can look into, and just want to see if I have that copied. I do not, but that's okay. Ahmi, would you mind posting the link for Alex Lang's website when you get the chance? So that link that Ahmi is going to post is a website from a guy who got the GRFP like many years ago. And on that website, he actually has kind of like a step-by-step how to apply. And at the very bottom, he has a bunch of PDFs of successful personal statements and successful research statements. So you can kind of look through those and read through, and you'll start to see that all of them kind of look very similar. So let's go through what that secret formula is going to be. So for the personal statement, you need to include kind of like a background or an introduction just to who you are and what you want to study. Then you're going to dive into intellectual merit, which is basically all of the research experiences that you've had and the things that you've contributed to science as an undergrad, or if you're applying as a first-year graduate student or second-year graduate student. And then you include a broader impact section, which is all of the involvement you had outside of just the lab per se. And then the last thing that they ask you to address in the solicitation is your future goals. And I always suggest to people when they're writing this, kind of come up with a theme for who you are and what you want to study. So just for example, I've always been really interested in conservation research, and a lot of my undergrad research experiences had to do with tropical Pacific islands. And so I was proposing to do a project at the University of Hawaii. So my theme throughout was conservation around tropical Pacific islands. So just kind of think about what kind of theme can connect all of your research experiences, even if they're all across the board.
So the first part of your personal statement should be your background. Like Blake said, it's kind of serve as an introduction, and this is the place where you can set up your theme. And this includes who you are. You can showcase your identity and what identity that you relate to like matters to you. So for example, being from a Pacific island, I'm from Guam. I made that very clear, like off the bat in my personal statement. And then you can talk about some topics about that you're passionate about. This includes like conservation efforts or your involvement on any particular organization or group that you really drives your goals. So you can include that in your background. And you can also add what unique perspective do you bring to STEM. And this is really good because it ties in and it sets the stage for what you'll be talking about and how your past research experience sets the scene on what you'll be doing in grad school and what motivates you.
All right, so moving into the intellectual merit section, this is where you're going to address your past research experiences that you've had. I'm assuming most of you are in an REU program since you're attending this webinar, so that's a great one to throw in there. If you were assisting with any projects in undergrad, if you were helping a graduate student, if you did like an honors thesis, those are all really great things to mention in the intellectual merit section. And in this section, you really want to highlight the skills that you learned from that experience. So I always kind of recommend in that section, if you can give like a 1-sentence summary of what your project was and what you found, and then in the second sentence, bold this and say, from this experience, I learned X, Y, and Z skills that I hope to either apply to a graduate project or build on in a graduate project. So you're basically telling them why you're ready to go to graduate school. So that's that last point. What makes you qualified to go to graduate school? And you can really highlight that through your past research experiences. So just for some ideas of skills that you can list, you can say that you learned how to design a project, you learned how to conduct field work, you learned how to do certain lab procedures, maybe you did like molecular techniques or something. You learned how to analyze data, maybe in a coding language like R. You learned how to visualize that data to make graphs. You might have learned how to write like a model, model some data. And then if you had some sort of writing component to it, maybe you learned how to do some academic writing to write a report. If you published, that's awesome. Mention that you have publications. If you went to conferences, that's another great thing to mention. And if you've done any education and outreach, you can mention that here. Education and outreach can also go in the broader impact section though. Okay, so we wanted to do a little bit of an interactive activity with you all. And if everyone could take a moment and think about the specific skills that you gained this summer in your internship and write them down, that would be awesome. And then in the next slide, we're going to ask if anyone would mind sharing. So we're just kind of doing a practice of that. Can I get a sentence of what my project was, what the major findings were, if you have them already, and then lastly, what major skills you got out of that. So go ahead and take a minute and kind of think through that and write it down, and then we'll share out in the next slide. And I can go back to the example skills if you want to create a list. So let's take like 2 or so minutes to do this.
Okay, would anyone like to share a bit about their project and what skills that they've learned this summer? Feel free to unmute.
And I don't know if Blake and Ahmi, if you can see the chat, you can let me know. And Maria has said, she said, I improved my coding skills and I learned how to read scientific papers successfully. Both difficult things. Good for you.
Yeah, and both skills necessary to succeed in grad school. So it's a really good way to lay the foundation. Chris also said, during the summer internship, I gained experience working in GIS software and utilizing current technologies such as UAVs and GNSS receivers. I gained skills that I would like to expand upon in areas such as hydraulic modeling. Yep,
Oh,
so that's a really specific example, and it segues into like any future paths that you want to do in graduate school. Another one wrote, some skills I've developed during this internship include developing my own research methodology based on existing literature, lab procedures, and data analysis for UV-Vis spectroscopy and NMR, and furthering my understanding on how to tie in data to my experiments.
Beautiful.
Yeah, these are all great. So these are little snippets of what you can talk about your research experience, and these are specific examples and skills that can be translated into graduate school, and definitely details that you can add into your GRFP application. And actually being as specific as using visual spectroscopy and NMR, like they'll be looking for those specific words and phrases, just so that you showed that you were qualified and that you've had this experience. So these are all really great examples.
Alrighty. So now we can move on to the broader impacts section of that personal statement. And this section is really about tying your academic research into the broader community and how you're applying your science. So the first bullet point we have here is, how has your previous research impacted broader non-STEM communities? Are you going out to classrooms and are you helping students understand some of the research you've been doing? Are you bringing your research to policy? Are you going to meetings? That kind of thing. You can also list what clubs and organizations you've been a part of, and within these, how you interacted with different components of society to help improve it. Just for an example, I'm gay. I identify with the LGBTQ plus community, and we were part of a group called Out in STEM in undergrad, and we would bring in queer professors just to talk about their research and talk about their experience in science and how they got to where they were. So kind of creating like a mentorship program for queer students. And we also had queer graduate student mentors as well. So that was a club and an organization that helped really solidify our identity in science and helped us to move forward. So these are clubs and organizations are something that you can mention. And you can also mention how your previous research and involvement promoted diversity and inclusion in STEM. If you identify with an underrepresented group in STEM and you're part of organizations that helped increase the representation of those students, that's another great thing to mention. For example, if you were part of like SACNAS or another like, yeah, if you were part of any group like that, that's a great thing to mention in this broader impact section as well.
Okay, and the last part of the personal statement is the future goals section, which takes up about half a page. You're going to want to talk about your career goals for post-graduation after you get your graduate degree. And this can either be like industry jobs, if you want to stay in academia and become a professor, you're going to want to talk about those details and what motivates you for those specific goals. You're also going to talk about your personal goals for post-grad, like, do you want to start a lab? Do you want to stay involved in the organizations that you talked about previously in your statement? Do you want to mentor students in the position that you choose to go to after you get your graduate degree? And how will the GRFP help you attain your goals? So will this funding help you secure graduate school? Will it give you like the scientific or the freedom to like pursue your specific scientific research interest? And these are all that you can talk about and kind of sum it up in your personal statement.
This is also a great place if you know about NSF Intern and do your research on that, you can show them that you've done your research into what this fellowship can do for you. So you could say, oh, this fellowship might also provide me with an internship with a governmental organization like NOAA, for example, or USGS, or and it'll help you explore other career options to help you get to that post-grad goal as well. All right, so this is just an example of, this is actually my personal statement, but just to show you kind of how you can structure it. So we've got that background or introduction that's maybe about a quarter to a half a page. This is my intellectual merit section. You can see that I've kind of bolded what the projects I did were, and then the skills that I got out of there. And then, so the intellectual merit was about, 1 page. You can see the broader impacts is down here. I talked about different clubs and organizations that I was a part of. We did some education and outreach stuff, so I mentioned that in there as well. This is the paragraph on OSTEM. And then this last section right here is that future goal section where you really talk about what you want to do in the future. And then if you have any references, like if you've had any publications or anything, you can list those in the bottom so that they can look up your publications. Oh, you can also put conference presentations, those kinds of things can go in the references as well.
Yeah, so at this time, we'd like to take any suggestions, tips, or questions about the personal statement. Feel free to type it in the chat or unmute.
And Ahmi, could you talk a little bit about your personal statement and what you put in and where you put it?
Yeah, like Blake, I also identify with the LGBTQ community. I'm also Chamorro from Guam, so I come from an underrepresented minority group in STEM, and those are very strong parts of my identity, and I made sure that was clear from my background. And then I tied in how being a Pacific Islander and working in ocean conservation was very important to me, and how we are usually not at the forefront of marine research, and how like my involvement and my inclusion has basically been an example of like what I want to see, especially in Guam, with local students and local professors like leading the way in research rather than looking for outside resources. And I think that was a very strong theme for me. So that's basically what I talked about. I'd be happy to share more about my personal statement if anyone's interested. I see a couple questions in the chat. Is it suggested to emphasize things in bold and to arrange them in categories in your actual statement? Yes, this is highly recommended. It makes it easier for the reviewers to like pick out what's important. So for my personal statement, all of my REUs that I've participated in, I made sure that they were bolded or underlined, something to really stand out so you can fully see in the paragraph. You're also going to want to bold the intellectual merit and the broader impacts part, just so that those two sections are clearly defined and clearly stated. And then you can also like bold your skills that you've learned. If you know a coding language, you're going to want to bold that. If you've worked with a specific methodology that's really useful and impactful, you're going to want to bold that. And any award or publication, you're going to want to bold. So it's really just highlighting like things that are highlighted in your CV or your resume. You're going to want to bold and make sure those stand out, because you want to ensure that your reviewer like takes those achievements and those accomplishments, and it's really just shown in front of them. You're not going to want to make them look for it on the page.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. We have a slide later down for the reviewer criteria, which is what they look for as they're grading these applications. And I just want to point out that these reviewers are reading like 50+ applications in a row. So if you bold it, they can really just easily go back and say, oh yeah, what did this student do? This student had really great coding experience. They were in an REU program. They did a ton of education and outreach. Oh, okay. Yeah, excellent. Okay, moving on. So bolding it really helps to organize and give that structure for the reviewers. So it's definitely recommended. And if you look at Alex Lang's website and look at all of the successful personal statements, you'll notice that most of them do the bolding as well. So we do recommend that. The second question from Christina, I see, is that my clubs that I was a part of stopped meeting during COVID. Should I write that in my personal statement? This is a huge, great point to make, is that our generation is kind of the COVID generation, and they know that. So they know that you might have had some hindrances with your research opportunities, with clubs and organizations, broader impacts things. So it's a great thing to acknowledge. And what they really want to see is adaptability. So if you're able to say, my club stopped meeting due to COVID, but we continued doing things online just to try to keep facilitating that connection and building that community so that we could progress in STEM. That's a great thing to mention. They really like to see that you were adaptable and how you dealt with COVID and how you still were able to succeed despite COVID interrupting in-person functions. Do you have anything to add, Ahmi?
Yeah, I know when we participated in the REU during COVID, it was all virtual. And I made sure to include a line in there that said, like, due to COVID-19, like, a lot of research programs were canceled. However, like, we had this wonderful opportunity to like do this pop-up REU. And so it's really just like changing that narrative and shifting it to see, like Blake said, how you can be adaptable and what work you've got done. Maybe not like if you didn't have any opportunities during COVID, you can even like segue it and be like, oh, now that things are like kicking back up, I'm like active in STEM and these are the things that I'm active in. So it's really just like addressing that and then like changing the narrative on this is how I was proactive and these are the like things that I've done to like sort of stand out during this time, but you can still acknowledge that it was a difficult time.
See another question from Ildiko. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. I've had a difficult time connecting with student STEM organizations since most of my undergrad experience was remote, and I'm currently taking a gap year after my graduation. Are there any organizations that you would recommend seeking out that have online meetings? So this is really interesting. I think if there's groups at your undergrad organization that would still let you be a part of them, they're a great place to reach out to and see if they adapted and have online meetings. Another thing you could do is start a group or an organization if you want to. I see that you're in marine biology. So if you're interested in connecting with, let's say with classrooms, there's a program called Skype a Scientist. So you can kind of zoom in and you can talk about maybe your undergraduate experience and how you got there and how you involved marine biology into that. That's a remote group. That's a possible one to look for, but yeah, just kind of look around. You can Google, you can look at your home institution. If there's any graduate schools that you're thinking about applying to, you can see what they have on their websites. You kind of just got to do some digging. And if they don't have any, then create your own and really take the initiative and put that in your personal statement that you did take that initiative.
Yeah, good idea. In fact, start one now, and then you can put it in your, if you do something now, like ask a professor if you can do research in their lab a few hours a week, then you can write about how you work in this research lab. Same goes for what Blake was just talking about, like starting some kind of initiative.
Yeah, and STEM organizations, oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
STEM organizations, they don't have to be like just at your collegiate level. They can also be like outside mentoring. There could be also outside outreach. Maybe you volunteered with like at the library or any like mayor's office. There's different ways that you can like be active in your community. I'm assuming, yeah, there's also like organizations that you can find like on Twitter for different STEM affinity groups that do different sorts of mentoring and other activities. So there's definitely other places that you can look. Val put in a list of like organizations such as SACNAS, ACES. These are all national organizations that they may have a local chapter, but you don't have to like necessarily be a part of the local chapter. Weems is another one. That's all online.
This is
yeah, so it's just
acronym central that.
Yeah, so it's just looking for these organizations like and kind of thinking creatively outside the box. I know one friend, she runs a blog and that is completely like a solo gig. She doesn't need an organization to do that. You can run a blog if you run a scientific Instagram account or a Twitter account. You can also talk about that. So it's definitely not activities that are just like, they're not just college club activities. You can like include anything, any involvement in STEM that you've done.
That's great. Yeah, the Instagram and Twitter is a great one to do remotely. Yeah. I see a question from Stephen that says, is it possible to defer the funding like if I wanted to take a gap year? Unfortunately, no. The year that you apply, if you are awarded, you have to take it and you have to start graduate school that fall. The interesting thing about GRFP is graduate school, if you're doing a PhD, is going to be a 5-year program, and GRFP gives you 3 years of funding. So you can kind of cherry pick which years you want to do. If you come into a lab that has a grant for you that covers you for 2 years, you can defer, and it's called being on reserve rather than being on tenure. So you can be on reserve for year 1, reserve for year 2, and then be on tenure to get the funding for years 3, 4, and 5. So there is some like flexibility with when you take the funding, but if you're awarded, you can't take a gap year. You have to start in the fall. Otherwise you need to reapply next year. So if you get it, take it, because it's a great opportunity, unless you have extenuating circumstances. Nancy said, would it be worth to put in a paper that's currently under review, or should it be published to include it? Do you want to take that one, Ahmi?
Yeah, I would definitely include that it's submitted and it's under review. That's a big accomplishment, especially as an undergrad. So I would include that. I would also include any like conference awards or any other award recognitions that you've received throughout your undergrad, and it doesn't have to be papers. So these are all things that will help contribute. And this would be added in your intellectual merit portion of your personal statement.
Absolutely. And one other piece of advice for that one is, if you're the first author, brag about it. Say, I have a first authored paper that's under review in X, Y, and Z journal that we're hoping to have published by December or something like that. Humble brag, humble brag. Okay, another question is, would being a peer mentor in a STEM scholarship fall under that umbrella? I believe the umbrella is broader impacts. Absolutely. Yeah, being a mentor in a STEM space is absolutely something that you can include in your broader impacts. I was going to say I was an online math tutor for students in low-income areas during COVID. Should I put that in, even though it isn't something related to my research? Yes, you should, because this is a part of increasing visibility and diversity in STEM. Is if you are helping underrepresented groups by providing a resource to help them progress in their STEM careers, that is absolutely something that can be put in broader impacts. And I think highlighting that it's during COVID, that is something that shows that adaptability as well. So definitely have that be like a whole paragraph in your broader impacts. Let's see, we've got, so you can bring up a paper even if you just submitted it rather than it being accepted. Yes, you would just say that it's under review. And a lot of the reviewers, they're all scientists, they'll all know kind of what that process looks like. So they'll know that you're in the revision stage, and they'll know that there's probably a good chance it's going to get accepted if you're under revision. All right, awesome questions, everyone. Do you all have any more questions? Abby says, I'm getting a master's degree before going into a PhD program. Should I wait until I'm about to start the PhD to apply? Ahmi, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I would say you should definitely take advantage of applying as an undergrad, just because you do have like essentially an unlimited amount of chances to apply. I know people who applied as an undergrad, they're planning to do their master's, and then they're going to save the GRFP for their PhD. I have one friend who like just got awarded, and that's her plan. So that can definitely be an avenue that you're looking in, especially if your master's degree is already funded. If not, then you can essentially also just segue into getting a PhD directly. So if your master's degree isn't funded, you can either choose to use your GRFP towards your master's degree or save it. And then if you're starting your master's degree, and let's say you aren't awarded this year, when you're in your master's degree, you only have one chance to apply after that, because once you're enrolled in graduate school, you can only apply once. So it's definitely like being very like tactical and strategic about how you're applying. So as an undergrad, I would recommend just to apply every year. And like as a post-baccalaureate student, I'd recommend to apply as many chances as you can. And then as a master's student, that's kind of when you're capped out your one application, and then you have to be more strategic on like whether you're applying as a first or second graduate student.
Yeah, and I think it's really good to talk about the chances you get to apply. This is all in the eligibility section of the solicitation if you're looking to read through it yourself. But basically kind of like Ahmi's saying, if you are currently an undergrad or you have not started graduate school yet, so you're taking a gap year or you're doing a post-bac program or something like that, you can apply as many times as you want. So let's say I'm a senior in undergrad, I can apply. Let's say I don't get it. The next year I'm taking a gap year. I can apply again. Let's say the year after that, I'm just doing research like in a normal job before going to graduate school. I can apply again. You have as many chances as you want to apply until you start graduate school, like Ahmi was saying. Once you start graduate school, whether that's the first year of your master's, second year of your master's, first year PhD, second year of your PhD, you only get that one chance to apply and then you're done. So like Ahmi was saying, I would recommend that you apply as many times as you can before you start that degree. Okay. Are there any more questions on my math too? Okay, we already covered that one. Okay. Cool. If there's no more questions, we are going to go ahead and move on to the research statement component. All right, so the research statement is a 2-page statement. And again, you're going to address the intellectual merit and the broader impacts in that section. And here's kind of like a general outline. For a quarter of a page, you'll have the background and the introduction, but for your research projects. So if you're thinking about like a paper, they usually have that introduction and background section. So it's similar, but it's kind of like a shrunken down version of that. You'll get into the nitty-gritty details of how you're going to assess or conduct your project. And then there's intellectual merit and broader impacts within that as well.
So for the introduction for your research statement, it's going to look different from your personal statement. The introduction is going to serve, you're going to set up like what your study system is and why it's so important. For example, I wrote about coral reef ecology. And so I did just a short introduction on like why coral reefs are important. I'm studying coral recruitment. And so the knowledge gap of that, I addressed it in that first paragraph. And then I also posed what are my research questions and how will I test them, which includes like my hypotheses, what are my aims and objectives for my research plan. And then that sets up into like the next portions of your research statement.
So the nitty-gritty section, sorry, I guess that's not a super clear title, but we'll just kind of go through what the nitty-gritty is. Here in this section, they want you to basically list your aims and your hypotheses very, very clearly. And I definitely bolded those in my research statement. But just so they know that you know how to formulate like a really like nicely designed hypothesis and how you can test it. They want you to know what methods you're going to use to answer those questions. So if, for example, the person before was talking about NMR, if you use like molecular techniques, I work with isotopes. So if you're using those tools, they want you to kind of outline how you're going to use those and what your results would tell you about each of your different hypotheses. One of the criteria for the evaluation criteria in the solicitation is how will you determine successful evaluation of your research questions? And that's almost like if I see this, then this must be true. If I see this, then this must be true. So how are you going to evaluate that you actually answered the question that you posed? That's a really important piece of the research statement. And then lastly, is your project feasible? In other words, can you complete your research project with the resources available at the university you proposed and with the lab that you proposed to work with? This is another just kind of logistical thing. When you apply, you have to say which school you intend to attend. But if you are awarded the GRFP, you do not have to go to that institution. You do not have to go to the lab that you propose to work with. You just have to put that, but you're not tied to it by any means. You're also not tied to doing the research project that you propose to do, but you can. So this is more just for them to see that you can formulate a research plan. They're not funding the project that you propose, they're funding you as an individual.
And then the next section, it's going to be intellectual merit. So this will be how will your study advance scientific knowledge in your field. So you're going to want to tie it back to that knowledge gap that you've talked about and clearly define out how it advances your field of study. You're going to also want to talk about what makes your research novel or cutting edge. Like if you're sequencing something, being like, oh, maybe it hasn't been sequenced before, maybe it's a new method that you've developed. maybe this is new technology that you're working with, or maybe like no one's ever studied the specific study system that you're looking at. And you're going to want to say that out like explicitly. And lastly, will your findings contribute essential information that lays the foundation for new exploration? So you can go into like what other questions that you can explore from this research project, or what future directions you can see it going. It's basically setting the stage on why the science is important, and how it's going to advance the field, and how it's going to be beneficial to other people in academia, and its relevancy.
Okay, so moving on to the broader impact section. Again, this is how your science is going to impact society. So how will this study benefit society in general? I'll just throw out an example. If you're studying bees, for example, as pollinators and bee conservation, that's going to have an application to agriculture and to all sorts of things. So you can list how those are going to generally benefit society. For coral reef research, maybe that's helping preserve the coral reefs for ecotourism, for cultural identity, for fishing, for all sorts of things like that. So how can you tie your research findings into society? How will you make your study widely available and, most importantly, digestible for the public? Are you planning to do education and outreach with your study? Are you doing science Twitter or Instagram? Are you doing a podcast? Are you going to classrooms to share out? Are you getting involved in like city council meetings, those kinds of things that in your research statement, since you're probably not doing it already, you can propose that you're going to do those things when you get to graduate school. And lastly, can your findings be applied directly to current problems in communities, government, policy, etc.? Just for an example of that, we have a native Hawaiian fish pond here in Hawaii, and there's a lot of graduate students working on projects in the fish pond. And all of those projects are going towards basically sustainably managing an ecosystem that's a food resource for the entire island. So a lot of their research is directly applicable to food accessibility. And here's just an outline of what that research statement can look like. You'll see up top, we've got that introduction section, what you propose to do, the questions you want to answer. Here you can see there's the aims, or basically the research questions. I bolded the hypothesis, the methods. These are the different resources available at the university that I propose to work at. So again, the nitty gritty. And then here's just a little section with the intellectual merit and the broader impacts. And lastly, if you cited any papers in your introduction, which I would recommend you do just to show you did your background reading, this is the references section that we have at the bottom here.
So now we'd like to take any suggestions, tips, or questions about the research statement. Again, feel free to unmute or type it in the chat. Are there rules on citations? Any suggestions on ways to save space? That's a good question, especially because you have such a limited page count for the research statement. There are no rules on citations as long as you have like the main author, the year, and maybe where you can find it. In Blake's example, there's a very like condensed version of the references. So as you can see, you have the author, the year is published, and where you can find it. And then if there's a long author list, you can just put et al. You can also, you don't have to like indent after each citation that you have. So yeah, those are ways to save space. Is it better to talk about a research project that you have already started, like in an REU, or something completely new that you would start in graduate school? That's a great question. I think that really depends on your familiarity and like confidence in that research plan. A lot of what NSF is looking for is just whether it can be thought out, but I've also heard some feedback on like, oh, this project sounds like it's been completed already, which there's a little bit of like a 50-50 on a gamble on what you're proposing. For graduate students in grad school, they usually write about something that they're already working on. But as an undergrad, I think Blake can talk about his experience and how he applied.
Sure. Yeah. So I think a lot of people do actually write about their undergrad research just because that's what they're familiar with, like Ahmi said. I took a little bit of a different approach. I actually did end up doing the project that I proposed. And I don't know, coming up with a graduate research project is really, really difficult. We had some other workshops kind of on how to formulate that, but kind of my process was my REU advisors introduced me to a lot of people that worked at NOAA. They introduced me to a bunch of other graduate students, and we just kind of talked through kind of what I was interested in. And then from there, where could that field go? So I got a lot of really great advice from those people that I talked to, and specifically the people that worked for NOAA were interested in, we work on like pelagic predators and how much they rely on coral reef for food resources. That was a huge knowledge gap that they wanted to address. So that's what I wrote my research statement on. So again, it's kind of up to you with the familiarity of what you're familiar with. And I ended up talking with those scientists a lot, and they really helped me flesh out the research statement. So yeah, getting as many eyes on this as possible is really, really helpful. So yeah, totally up to you with what you want to write about.
The next question is, would you recommend getting in contact with a potential advisor at the proposed lab university for their help planning this proposed research? I definitely would recommend this, especially because some graduate professors, they won't accept you, or like you have to find out whether they're accepting students at this time. So that's a part of the process, in like getting in contact with a graduate advisor. I know Idiko, you said you're in marine biology, and usually in the marine biology field, you have to contact that advisor directly to see like whether they're taking students. And when you apply to graduate school, it's usually into that specific lab and not a program. And getting all these details via email and talking and reaching out to these professors before, you can get like information on the resources that you'll include in your research plan, like what equipment they have access to, what research they've done before prior to. So these are all like things that'll help that you can iron out in your research plan, like such as the resources. So I would recommend getting in contact with your advisor. And then also like, it also goes to show like if you're thinking about the GRFP, that really is like a point in your favor that you're at least thinking about funding and that you're prepared and you're preparing this application for it. So it's also like a point in your favor because they'll see that you're being like proactive with graduate school applications.
Totally agree with everything Ahmi just said. And something additional to that is if you reach out to these professors, you might get varied responses, but in your initial reach out email, if you say, I'm applying to the GRFP, I'd love to meet with you to talk about my personal statement and research plan, you'll get varied responses. So I had one professor that I was talking to who totally like read my statements. We met, he was like, read these papers and, you know, incorporate these in these sections. And he was really instrumental to helping me apply to the GRFP. The advisor that I'm actually working with now, I had sent him the statements and he said, I don't have time to read those right now. I'm so sorry. So like you might get a varied response depending on the professor that you reach out to, but it doesn't hurt to ask. And again, if you can get as many eyes on this paper as possible, like that will really, really help you make sure that you're concisely and clearly going through the project and the goals and making sure that it's understandable for everyone. The people who grade this will generally be in the field. So for example, if you apply to marine biology, the reviewers will be marine biologists, but they might not be, for example, coral reef ecologists, or they might not be, you know, stable isotope geochemists. So you need to make sure that you're really elaborating on the processes and making it digestible for anyone broadly.
Nancy asked, is it possible to cook this up on your own, or do the folks that get this award generally already have contact with the professor they want to work with for grad school? It's definitely possible to do this like without a professor's help. But like Blake is emphasizing, like the more eyes you have on it, the better. Like it doesn't even have to be a professor that you're applying to. Maybe you have a really good mentor at your home institution who can look over the application. You don't have to commit to working with them, but if they can read it over, maybe a grad student that you're working with can read it over, those edits will be very beneficial just because there is like a certain way that the GRFP should be written or like is recommended to be written, that usually gets funded. But if you can like work with the professor that you're thinking of applying to graduate school for, that's even better. You also don't have to like necessarily commit to that professor that you're going to work for. So I had a couple professors in mind who I wanted to work for, but I just committed to one project and one like institution that I committed to writing my GRFP to. And that's how I approached that. And I didn't really commit to that graduate school yet, but in my application, I like said that this is where I wanted to go and laid it all out.
Totally agree with that. And so I ended up writing in my application that I wanted to go to the University of Hawaii, and then the professor that actually helped me write the application was from Rhode Island. So he knew that I had written this application as if I was going to another institution, but he knew that if I was awarded, I could still take that money to his lab too. I see a question from Sam. What if you have multiple research experiences, REU and home institution, but separate projects? Is it better to focus this statement on one experience over the other? I think this kind of goes back to what Ahmi was saying before, which is whichever one you are most comfortable writing about, that is the one that you should probably do. Or if one happens to be more novel than the other, like you're developing a new research technique or something like that, there's a lot of different things you can weigh there. And I think talking to your mentors about which one to do would probably be helpful in deciding.
Yeah, and when you talk about your multiple research experiences, you can flesh that out all in your personal statement, and that goes to show like these are all my experiences that I've covered, but your research plan is like what you are proposing to do in graduate school. So they want something that like you can spend like a good chunk of time on. They want to see it be thought out. Like Blake mentioned in the details, like how will you assess whether your project was successful? That's something that is very like you have to think that through. And so you're going to want to focus on one project, and going into like those details and those skills on like, oh, I've completed this methodology, or I know this code and this is how it'll be beneficial to my project. You can definitely include that, but sticking to one research topic on one research question, they're going to want to see that specificity in your research plan. They're not going to want like a broad general umbrella statement or like a broad general question. They're going to want to see like this is something that can actually be executed, as opposed to like just a nice idea of a research plan.
Another thing I just thought of is if you already did the project in undergrad, maybe don't write about like the exact same project, because they'll know that you wrote about it in your personal statement. But if you can add dimensions like, we answered these questions in my undergrad research, but now these questions came up that I want to address in graduate school. So that way you can kind of, like Ahmi was saying, make sure it's like fleshed out and it is a project that you could kind of go through as a graduate project. Any other questions anyone wants to unmute or put in the chat?
I had a question that I wasn't really sure how to phrase, so I didn't put in the chat, but I go to like an undergrad only school. So if I wanted to like write my application like with an advisor there, like it's not like I'm applying to work with this person because like I can't. Is that like a approach that can even like work for this this project proposal, or is it like not recommended to do that?
I don't think it's recommended, because I think you have to like say that this is where I'm going for graduate school. They can definitely help you like read over your draft and like check the science, but maybe they have like recommendations on like what labs to start reaching out to for who you can specifically say that you're going to work with, or like what institutions you can start looking at to like hone down your ideas. But yeah, just because you have to like say this is where I'm going to do this research. And if like there's no graduate program to facilitate that, then you can't do it there.
Okay, thank you.
Right, and the program that you list that you're going to attend, again, you're not beholden to that at all. So yeah, just pick a program that it looks like this would be feasible, that you could do this project in this lab, and then write about it. And then that mentor that you have in the undergrad program can absolutely help you with the application and write it as if they were going to help you. I'm sure most of your mentors went to graduate school and have that experience that they can help you write about as well. Okay. Any other questions? Please feel free to unmute or put in the chat. And let's go ahead and we can talk about the reviewer criteria. Okay, so as we've kind of mentioned throughout this this presentation, the very first criteria is the intellectual merit and the broader impacts. So we kind of went through those definitions before, but again, intellectual merit is the potential to advance knowledge and understanding within its own field or across different fields. And the broader impacts is how to benefit society or advance desired societal outcomes. The reviewer criteria number 2 is to what extent do the proposed activities suggest and explore creative, original, or potentially transformative concepts. So this is that intellectual merit to another level, is how novel is this research and what are you contributing to science? Reviewer criteria number 3, again, these are all from the solicitation, is the plan for carrying out the proposed activities well-reasoned, well-organized, and based on a sound rationale? Does the plan incorporate a mechanism to assess success? So really just fleshing out a project that seems feasible, that can be done, and you just want to show them that you really thought it out and know how to start a project or complete a project start to finish.
Another question is how well qualified is the individual, team, or organization to conduct the proposed activities? So like make sure you do your homework and say like, these are all my resources. This is a feasible research plan that can be executed and done successfully. That's important. And then lastly, are there adequate resources available to the PI, either at the home institution or collaborations to carry out the proposed activities? So I think we forgot to mention this, but you can say a home institution, but if they have partnerships with other institutions that can help with your research plan, that's also good to flesh out. And so you don't have to just stick to one institution. Like, for example, my lab works with different organizations at various island nations. So that was really important to me, especially with broader impacts. And so I made sure to include that in my statement. If a lab works with other NGOs or other local organizations, you can definitely include that and how it will serve you. There was a question after applying, how long will it take back to hear from the NSF? That's a great question. You usually hear back around April. And so you apply in October and then you find out your results in April.
And I just want to say that's totally nerve-wracking because for me, a lot of the labs that I was reaching out to, they didn't have funding. And so they were like, you can come if you get the GRFP. So in April, I didn't know if I was going to graduate school or not, which all of my friends had known where they were going, if they had jobs, that kind of thing. So it is a little stressful to hear back from them, but just be patient. It might pay off. Yeah. So anyways, it does take a while for them to get back. Okay. So the next thing that we pulled together for you is this is from Alex Lang's website. These are examples of the reviewer comments that you can actually see on the different statements that were given. So I just wanted to go through and kind of point through some of the things that the reviewers mentioned so you know what to look for and what to emphasize in your statements. So first of all, this is the rubric. They first address intellectual merit, and then they address broader impacts. So this is for an intellectual merit on an ecology review. They saw that the research that was proposed was novel and interesting. They had considerable experience in ecology in their personal statement. They had a lot of research experiences. And in their, again, in their proposal, they had a deep understanding of ecological theory that they showed through the background section. For broader impacts, they really highlighted outreach and science communication. They mentioned very well that they wanted to work with foreign scientists and develop conservation. They wanted to work with foreign scientists for development and conservation agencies. And then lastly, the student had publications in review and in preparation. The GRFP kind of places a lot of emphasis on publications. I'm not totally sure why, and I have an issue with that because it's kind of like a privilege and an access thing to be able to publish, but if you do have publications or they're in review, that's a great thing to mention.
This is for astrophysics. So again, for intellectual merit, they looked at all their numerous research experience. So you're going to want to list that out and bold it, as well as several presentations and as well as publications. They also took their reference letters into consideration, talking about drive and independence and further broader impacts. Their involvement with student organization activities, also public outreach. So any volunteer work that you may be doing, and engaging with the public. So they really like to see that you're communicating your science and you're communicating it effectively. These are all really good signs of like a good GRFP application.
And this one is from biological oceanography. They said there was a very clear background and motivation for the research. There were clear aims and methods. There were necessary resources to succeed in the proposed project. They mentioned an importance of science education and communication. They mentioned that they wanted to educate and engage with underserved school communities. The applicant showed good adaptability. Teaching and outreach career influencing marine policy was an important thing mentioned in the application. And this is again from the letters. They were described as passionate, dedicated, dependable, hardworking, independent, and holding a powerful collection of intellect. All right. So that being said, are there any other questions that you all have or suggestions or tips that you'd like to share about the review criteria?
I'll add one tip, which is that it's really pretty subjective. It's, you know, the panels, the people who review these things are different from application to application, maybe from, you know, day to day, their outlook. It's a bit like grading figure skating at the Olympics. You know, it's pretty subjective, or gymnastics. So, you know, don't get too down if you don't happen to get it. There's a lot of competition for it. I do think this is really good practice for grad school applications, like writing statements. You know, you've kind of got a recipe now that is roughly what you would want to include in an application to graduate school. So next we're going to talk about letters of recommendation. And so this is something that, you know, you'll need. And you'll see from these clippings that there's actually a lot of research out there about how implicit bias and maybe overt bias affect you know, selection of, say, graduate students. This also applies to promoting or hiring people in faculty positions and so on. And these biases are held by all of us. We all have some biases. So first, there were several articles about doing large studies, like 5,000 people in the study, you know, being looked at, their letters and everything, and finding differences between the two, between, let's say, male and female. I haven't seen anything yet that addresses non-binary or trans or other gender identities. And one thing also with names that sound English or Anglo and white tend to be selected more often than, say, names that sound Indian or Asian or Black, because, you know, people make up stories in their mind about, oh, they might not speak English properly or something like that. And so some studies have found that people who whitened their resumes got more job callbacks. And I had two interns one summer who worked together in West Texas, driving around. Actually, I think it was later in a job. Both were African-American gentlemen, and one had a very English name, sounding white name, John Braswell, and the other one's name was African, and he was originally from Nigeria, but is American. His name is Olamide Dada. And they noticed when they're driving around Texas that John got more callbacks on jobs. How you weight in it is, I mean, you can, I think it's really sad that, people do this, but, or that they need to, or feel they need to, but, people put their initial sometime instead of their first name, things like that. Next slide, please. And this is kind of, it's depressing for sure. It's not great. So the kinds of things, the differences between letters, say for men and women, and this probably also qualifies for between white sounding names and non-white sounding names, is that the letters for men tend to be quite a lot longer, and they focus more on accomplishments. And, like they did this and they published that and they got this experience. And, for women, it tends to be more like, oh, she's really cheerful and she chips in at the lab. She'll be a great team player. Similarly, you get more definitive praise, generally speaking, for men, and more doubt raisers for women. Faint praise like, well, she's fairly good at doing this, or if she only did that, or I think, some uncertainty. Now, this sounds really kind of ridiculous, but I got to tell you firsthand. So I've read a lot of letters for scholarships primarily, but also for internships. And it's shocking when you start looking. It's like, holy smokes, the differences. Like people will say unbelievably inappropriate things about people, things like, well, if it weren't for her blue hair and her nose ring, things that are just not relevant here. And so just to make you aware, this is a thing. And so how to help how to get letters of recommendation that are good and strong. So if we go to the next slide, first of all, think about who you're going to ask. And I believe in getting people who really believe in you. I got a big scholarship in Canada where I'm from, and it was no thanks to my advisor who didn't really believe in me, wrote me a super mediocre letter, but it was the other two people who really supported me. And, like, who believes in you. So, it's debatable if you have to include somebody who like an employer but if you can avoid picking people who are not supportive, do avoid it. Do what you can to help these people get to know you. So for instance, meet them after class or email them or, that kind of thing. Go to office hours, they still exist. And talk about things in science that are interesting to you, maybe things that you've learned from taking their course. So something that goes beyond their course. If you are a student in a course and they don't know you beyond that, it's really hard for them to write very much about you. You might get perfect grades. And you can ask for advice on grad schools. One thing I did was I went to two professors whose classes I enjoyed a lot. And I asked them, I said, I have these 3 opportunities for graduate school. One is working on micro rills in snow in the Arctic. One is doing armchair research on rivers. And one is doing glacial geology in the high Arctic. And so the hydrologist said, oh, I definitely would go with the one with the rills. The glacial geologist said he would pick that one, and that's much bigger picture. And I thought, oh, okay, that helped. It was like, okay, that resonates with this person, and his course resonates more with me. And then to help them write a good letter, it's really helpful. It takes a long time to write a really strong letter of recommendation. If you happen to be at a school with very few professors, they may have to write several letters. It's a big burden, really, unfortunately for them. So provide them with as much information as you can about the opportunity or opportunities, like the schools you want to apply for, scholarships, and give them your resume or CV. And then I would actually give them a list of your accomplishments, especially if they have never written a letter for you before, and sort of as they relate to the opportunities. And, these are things that can be included in the letter where it's like somebody might be sitting there scratching their head thinking, well, I know they're really good, but how do I show that? And then they look at your list and go, Oh, right. She analyzed this, or they analyzed this thing, you know, in our lab or in our class, and did a really outstanding job with the team. So that's being prompted by this list of accomplishments. Yeah, so again, it's, you know, it's a kind of squishy thing. It's not particularly great way of people selecting people, but we try to raise awareness about it. And I'm going to put 2 links in the chat. One is an article that is really intended for letter writers, but I think it's a good one in that it helps you see what, and I would share it actually with letter writers. Back in the day when people were in the office, I would sometimes leave these out by the photocopier machine in the department office so that people could see this kind of thing, or pin it up on a bulletin board. I'm not sure if this link will work, but let's see, maybe it will. So the first one is an article, and the second one has, again, this is a bit for the people who write the letters and read them, because guess what? The biases of those reading them are as bad as the people writing them, okay? And so I recommend reading it. I know it's kind of squished together, but it's got a lot of good information in there. And, you know, again, share this with your department, that kind of thing. Yeah, and talk to your potential advisors. Thanks.
Thanks, Val. Another thing I just wanted to mention is that one of the main goals for the NSF GRFP is to increase diversity and inclusion in STEM. So I wouldn't say trying to hide your name from this application or hiding your identity. That's not what we're recommending here, but just for something to be aware of that happens with the letters of rec. Make sure you're picking people who will represent you really well in those letters is really important. I know we're getting close to time up here, but we're just going to go quickly through a sample timeline of how you can start applying. You all are just now right at the right time to start this process. We would recommend starting by reading the solicitation that's on that GRFP website that Ahmi linked earlier. I would recommend that you kind of make an outline of your personal statement and what you want to talk about in each of your paragraphs. I would break it up into that background, intellectual merit, broader impacts, kind of structure and future goal structure. Start brainstorming a research project for your research statement. Start asking mentors if they'll write letters of recommendation for you, just to have it in the back of their minds. In early September, start writing the rough drafts of the personal and research statements. Reach out to your mentors and potential PIs for help with research statements. In mid to late September, ask many people for the feedback on the personal and research statements. I even sent it to my mom, who's an English teacher, just because if she could read through it and it made sense to her, I knew it would make sense to anyone. Continue working with potential PIs on research statements. And then around early October, start preparing your final drafts. Follow up with your letter writers and make sure they submit on time. And then this is from 2 years ago, so this is not accurate, but just to highlight that the deadlines are generally in mid-October. And I think Ahmi mentioned earlier, they do stagger based on your subject. So you can kind of get an idea of where you're applying. I think Ahmi and I both applied under geoscience. But in mid-October, finalize your application and submit it, and then follow up with your letter writers to make sure that they submit it on time. Another thing about the letters is I think you have the opportunity to submit up to 5 and they'll read the first 3. So if you only ask 3 people and one of them doesn't submit on time, maybe consider having a 4th that would fill in for someone who didn't submit on time. Okay, these are some general tips. The NSF GRFP funds you and not your project, and make sure you ask letter writers who know you well. Those are both super important. So with that, do you all have any final questions for us or for Val? Or yeah, we're just happy to open up the floor and chat with you if you have any questions.
And we will email you with you know, various things, the slides, the recording, other resources. And I do ask, if before you sign off, if you would please go to the link in the chat and fill out what is a very short survey about today's workshop. That would be really helpful. It gives us an idea of how to improve for next time. And thanks for, you've been an amazing source of questions today, everybody. It's really satisfying when we hear a lot of questions and get a lot of questions, because then we know that, you know, this is interesting to you or relevant, and hopefully we can help you, and it shows that you're engaged. So thank you for all those questions. So there's another question, a couple of them. When do you plan to release the slides? So hopefully in the next few days, we'll put together a folder and include that, and then send you that email link, for instance. And then for Ahmi and Blake, any tips for people applying as a second-year grad student?
Yeah, I applied as a second-year graduate student and I got it. I was really lucky because my reviewers didn't comment that I had no publications out. So like one comment specifically said, oh, this student has really great potential, publications will follow. And so although like publications is usually really emphasized in the GRFP, I think like more professors and reviewers are starting to realize that like not everyone can have a publication so early on in their career. And so just highlighting like what you've done, especially if you're involved in like student organizations, that was really helpful for me and any outside involvement. I also thought my theme of like being a Pacific Islander and emphasizing Pacific Islander led ocean conservation was very like that was highlighted a lot in my reviewer comments. And so if you do any outreach work, make sure you emphasize that, and any awards that you've give. There's an awards section where you can list all the awards you had. So even though I didn't have any publications, I did have a lot of like scholarships and awards that they did take into consideration. And so like make sure you like highlight yourself. It's very important, especially as a second-year graduate student. I've heard that they're a little bit more critical just because like you kind of have gotten in the groove of graduate school. And so they're looking for like more refined skills. And so being as specific as you can and like going into detail as much as you can and showing that you actually like have the knowledge and the background to like support this statement is really helpful. There's also another question. Can you get letters of rec from graduate students that mentored you? You can. We would recommend like you going to the actual professor who mentors those graduate students. So maybe they can like, you can ask them to like help the professor write the letter or sign it, just because that holds more weight. Like having a letter of rec from a professor over a graduate student, even though you haven't worked with that professor, it's going to hold more weight just because they have like PhD after their name. But that doesn't mean that you can't go to a graduate student and be like, well, I worked well with you. Can you just like emphasize these skills or these experiences to your rec letter writer? And so you can like navigate those conversations that way. But if you know that professor can't write a rec letter, then a graduate student is fine. We just would recommend like a professor over a graduate student.
Totally. And for me, my graduate student that I worked with in undergrad, her name was Natalie. Shout out to Natalie, loved her. But she wrote me like a fabulous letter. And then she actually, like, I didn't work with the professor hardly at all, but she actually handed the letter to the professor. The professor signed it and was the one who submitted it, even though it was her words. So that is a possibility as well.
It's actually discouraged formally, but you know, if the person agrees with what's in there, it doesn't seem to be, you know, too problematic, but just be careful of that.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's just the professor didn't really know me well enough to comment. So it was great that she had all of those things. So yeah, I guess maybe formally in other settings, it might not be encouraged, but for us, it is, because for the GRFP, they really take into consideration who's writing those letters.
Sorry, maybe I misunderstood. What I meant was that it's not recommended to have one person write it and another person sign it, but I think you were saying the grad student was writing it. Is that right?
For me, the grad student wrote it and the professor signed it. So it sounds like maybe you're saying that's not recommended, but I actually would recommend.
Right. No, I'm sorry. I misunderstood. And I was talking about like, you know, if you write your own letter and send it.
Oh,
it's fine to actually give the bits of the letter and make it sort of letter-like and so on.
Yes.
So I have uploaded, I don't know if it succeeded, but see if it has. I uploaded the slides in a PDF format. And hopefully you can download them right now.
And one other thing, sorry, I just lost the tab that I was on, but I have sorry, 1 second. Okay, here it is. This is like an application resource guide for the GRFP. It mentions everything that we've said today. It has sample statements in there. Feel free to open that, use it, share it as much as you'd like. And then if you want to reach out, I'm happy to meet with folks and just kind of outline statements. If you just want to talk through what some of your research experiences were and kind of pulling out those essential bits and pieces that you would want to put in a statement, like please reach out. I'm happy to meet with you all.
Yeah, also happy to do that. I put my email in the chat.
And thanks.
And again, please fill out the short survey that Val sent in the chat.
So let's give a hand to Blake and Ahmi. You did a phenomenal job. Thank you both. Really appreciate it. All right. Well, have a good evening and have a good week too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We'll also stick around if anyone has questions too.
I actually have to run, but
Okay.
thank you, Val. Thank you, Blake.
Thank you both. That was
Ahmi.
a beautiful job. Really loved it.
Bye.
And then we should maybe look at watch the recording sometime in the next 6 months and see is there anything that we should change.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again. That was great.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Loved having you both like bounce off each other too. That was very nice.
That's great. Ayana or Sierra, do you guys have questions? I think probably not.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks. Thanks again, Blake.
No problem. All right, see you later.
Bye.
Bye.